Merhabalar. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Center for Spatial Justice, aka Mekanda Adalet Derneği, aka MAD in short. Here at MAD we are working creating knowledge, drawing maps, organizing walks for more democratic, inclusive, ecological, urban environmental spaces. Most of our public activities are listed under MADacademy, that's our umbrella program, and this is the 20th MADacademy of this year. And today we are hosting a very distinguished guest, Professor Mindy Fullilove. Professor Fullilove is a clinical psychiatrist and a professor of urban policy and health at the New School, New York City. Her work uniquely brings together psychology of place, urban politics, public health, and structural inequality. For the last 30 years or so, Mindy has been exploring the ways in which social and environmental factors such as segregation, violence, urban renewal affect mental health of communities living in disadvantaged segments of American cities. Mindy got her BA from Bryn Mawr College in history, then her MS and MD in medicine from Columbia University. She received her board certification in psychiatry in '84. She's a prolific writer, author of many articles and 6 books. Most recent ones are Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy in America's Sorted Out Cities, and Root Shock, How Tearing Up City Neighborhoods Hurts America and What Can We Do About It. And this tiny leaflet, a comic book, summarizes and accompanies her book Root Shock, and some of the copies are still available at the entrance. We can distribute later too if you haven't seen them. We are very happy and privileged to have Professor Fullilove, and her visit is very timely for us, although I mean she was here just for vacation and then to see the city. She was very kind to accept our offer to have a talk here. It's timely because urban problems, especially triggered by a new urban renewal schemes, has been dominating the urban politics and activism in Turkey for at least a decade or so now. There's much interest in these matters in academia and beyond, yet mostly the focus remains within the boundaries of our academic disciplines. Mindy's work offers a way to break those boundaries and offer a more a holistic take on this matter. I mean, we have historians, psychiatrists, urban planners, sociologists in the crowd who are looking forward to have this discussion after your talk. Professor Fullilove will be talking for like 40-45 minutes or so. Then we'll have a Q&A session for 30 minutes or so, and maybe another 30 minutes after that for meet and greet with Professor Fullilove. I'll leave the floor to you. Thanks again for being here. We are very privileged and lucky to have you. Yeah, applause, why not?
I have the good fortune to be joined today by Rhodes Kauffman, who is both my daughter and my collaborator. She started working as part of my research team 25 years ago. I won't say how old she was then, but she was very young. And she's been working with me ever since. She is currently the director of the University of Orange, which is a free people's urbanism school in Orange, New Jersey. And I'll be talking a little bit about that at the end. Please let me know if I talk too fast or I mumble or you can't follow me. So let's get to it. I'm talking today about work that we've done looking at the problem of displacement at both the individual level and the collective level. In the United States, we've had many decades of forced displacement of populations. And so the thing about this displacement is that it was always officially described as progress, and specifically related to the African American community, which is the community that I'm from. Nobody went and asked people, what was that like for you? And so one of the projects that we did was a project going to 5 cities where there had been urban renewal in African American neighborhoods and asking the African American people who had been displaced, what was that like for you? And although we were looking retrospectively, and this is basically 40 years after the project was carried out, ours was the first study that had really asked African Americans what their experience was of displacement. So what I want to talk to you about specifically is how we theorize the connection between a person and the loss of a neighborhood, and then a little bit about what we actually saw in our field work, and some of how we calculated the harms that this has done. And because it has been done over and over again, we've also had to do a lot of theorizing about what does it do if you do forced displacement not once, but many times in a few decades. So that's what I'd like to cover today. And I would like to talk a little bit about the sort of second half of the title of the book is what we can do about it, is how we see the Free People's University of Orange as part of repair. The very first paper that I wrote on displacement appeared in the American Journal of Psychiatry, which some of you who are psychiatrists will know. And it's the leading journal of psychiatry in the United States. And it was called Psychiatric Implications of Displacement, Contributions from the Psychology of Place. And I was specifically interested in how the individual was affected by a people. When that paper came out, one of the psychology journals published a reflection on the paper, and they had this illustration, which I found very fascinating. For those of you interested in symbols, what is striking is that although my paper is about the displacement of the person, the artist shows the roots as connected to the house. It's the house that has the roots. And this really becomes of fundamental importance. And of course, the person with suits, who's obviously a white person, has white hands tearing out the house, is a very fundamental part of the story, which is not touched upon in my paper particularly at all. My paper was a very theoretical paper about psychological mechanisms. So what the artist saw or had the flash to put into this drawing is something that, as all drawings, is open to our reflection and interpretation. But just to show you another house and how we begin to tackle the symbolism. James Marston Fitch Jr. was a very important American architect who wrote a book called American Building, which some of the planners and architects may know the work of James Marston Fitch. He taught architecture at Columbia University for many decades. He has this diagram in American Building, and his point is, as it says here, modern building acts as a selective filter which takes the load of the natural environments off man's body and thus frees his energy for social productivity. This is fundamentally important, theoretically important, because it starts to tell us how is a person related to a building. In psychiatry, when I studied, we didn't learn much about how the person, we didn't learn anything about how a person could be related to a building. So how, what is that about? But when we understand from the architects that the building is doing work for us, then we begin to start to see there's a relatedness, a relationship. For example, it's hot and noisy on the street outside. You could not sit and listen to me lecture if we were in a cafe downstairs. But being in this room where it's quiet, there's air conditioning, we have comfortable chairs, we are permitted to exchange ideas. This is fundamentally what buildings are doing, the work. And we, as the people who create the building, have designed the buildings to do the work for us. For example, making a room this size permits an intimate gathering of, what are we, about 25 or 30 people, which is a lovely size to gather. But you need a room this size and set up in this flexible manner to do this. So we design the spaces and then we use them. And in the process of that give and take between ourselves and the buildings, we put things on the wall, we put up a whiteboard, we have books, we make it useful to ourselves. What develops is what psychoanalysts named attachment. So attachment is the fundamental bond, and we often, attachment was described first as attachment between people. So a mother and a child are attached to each other. And the child can have a secure development because of that bond. But people are also attached to place. And the great psychoanalyst who described attachment, John Bowlby of England, also talked about the fact that everybody lives in a particular place, and we live in a particular place in a particular way. I like to have my students draw what I call personal geography. How do you move around the city? What are the places that you go to? And if everybody in this room, perhaps all of you live in Istanbul, but no two of you have the same way of moving in the city. And so that the way you use the city is it's your personal map. It's what you are attached to. And it's all the things, like just as the house provides us services, as we think about the neighborhood and the neighborhoods and the ferries and the Bosphorus and all the things that you have here in Istanbul, how are they serving you? Molly and I went on a food tour, which was highly recommended by our colleagues. And one of the things the guide introduced us to, a man who serves chai to people in a han. And now that's an incredibly important service, because this man moves around among a very large group of people and is the kind of person who knows everything that's going on. And is the kind of person who can quietly say a word and fix a problem. These people connect society. And in this city, it seems to me, that there are many people who are like the chai man. That this city is held together by those kind of people. I don't know the names of all of them, but as I watch the complex movements people are making, I can sense that there's this basket of connectedness. Not to people whose names you know necessarily, not to people you visit, but to people who are helping you. All of this works together to create our experience of place. One of the people who helped us with our study of Rhodes was a man named David Jenkins, who had lost his boyhood neighborhood to urban renewal when he was 11 years old. And it was a deep tragedy that scarred him basically for life. One point, I asked him if he would draw the neighborhood for me, and this is the drawing that he made. And the drawing is full of things that are very important in understanding how we live in a place. For example, there was a wildlife preserve, a nature preserve, and it was a swamp. And it had turtles and snakes and birds and many kinds of trees. It also had a man who was the director of the preserve, who knew a lot about nature and who taught him about nature. David always used to say to me that this man said to him, "David, don't forget, the egret gets all wet." So egrets are a type of bird, water bird with long legs, and so it helped him to remember the name of the egret. So, but there are many other things. Now he had a very disturbed, troubled family, but the neighbors would invite him over for dinner. There was a neighbor who would give him roses to take to his teacher so that his teacher would like him. He sang in a church choir with a woman who became a very famous American R&B singer, Patti LaBelle. Perhaps some of you have heard of Patti LaBelle. One person has. If you Google Patti LaBelle, you'll find a lot of songs. That's who he sang in the youth choir with. So so many layers of connections. Now, some of these connections are like the chime in, which is what sociologists call weak ties. And some of them are ties of family and church, which are what sociologists call strong ties. Now, it might seem that strong ties are what makes the world go round. But the point they have found is that that's actually not true. Ties of church and family are important, but they divide the world. They partition it. They keep us apart. It's the weak ties, the connection to the chime in, that holds the world together, because the chime in knows all the different groups. So in David's life, there were both strong and weak ties, plus a deep love of the land. If you read the comic book, which talks a little bit about David's life, you'll see that at one point we went on a visit back to the neighborhood. It had all been bulldozed, but it had never been redeveloped over 40 years. And there had developed a community garden. And he saw an old Italian man growing tomatoes on land that had belonged to his father. And so the artist who made the comic book made a frame, "They don't belong here. That's my father's land." That although he was in his 50s and he hadn't lived there since he was 11, the feeling was that it was his land. And this farmer being there was a reminder of the violation of the city violently taking the land from the people. Is this clear? Are there any questions? Can I pause for a second? Am I speaking clearly? So one of the theorists that has helped me put together a model of the relationship of the person to the larger group is Dr. Alexander Layton, who wrote quite a number of books, including a 3-volume study of Stirling County, Canada, where he compared small villages on the variable of integration, meaning how connected were they socially. And at one end, there was integration, which was characterized by these important attributes. Basically, that they thought of themselves as a group, they took care of the group, they took care of the vulnerable, and they could solve problems. As a psychiatrist, I have come to believe that one of the most important things that is destroyed by urban renewal is the capacity of a group to solve problems. And it turns out that place is never perfect. There's always something we don't have or something new that's arising. It can never be perfect. So the issue is not, can it be perfect? It can't be perfect. Can we solve the problems that are in front of us? And if in urban renewal, when we tear apart bonds, when we create disintegration, we tear apart this capacity to solve problems. So in the second volume of Alexander Layton's book, he shows this photograph of a Sunday school class in an English Protestant community in that place in Stirling County. And So this is a photograph of a community that he was calling integrated. And you will see many versions of this photograph all around the world. The point is, what you see is their interest in each other, their capacity to learn, their calmness. This is when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy, that we have reached the point of satisfying basic needs, and we're able to satisfy existential needs for connection, for belonging, for learning. This is integration. Now, African American communities at the time he was writing were considered to be slum communities. There's a recent book called Slums, which looks largely at India, and which points out that when they want to destroy a community, they meaning powerful people who have an interest in the land, when they want to take the land, one of the first things they do is say that the community that is there is a slum. So African American communities were called slums. But there are hundreds of thousands of photographs of those communities in this era before, just as urban renewal was getting started. And what we can see is that these places were not slums. They were highly functional, poor communities. So poverty is, being integrated is not connected with being rich or poor. Rich communities might actually be less likely to be integrated because they can buy everything. Whereas poor communities, people have to depend on their neighbors, so they actually have a propensity to make connections. So this is from the Hill District in Pittsburgh, and it's from a community center there. But the same kind of engagement, the same calm that we saw in the Sterling County photograph is present, and there are many others. But this is the Hill District, and sort of the area inside the red circle is the area that was targeted for urban renewal. Pittsburgh was a segregated, it still is a segregated city. So this is that segregation in 1930. And the Hill, I think, would be very familiar too. Had you been able to visit it, it would feel very familiar to you because of the hill. There's a lot of hills in Pittsburgh. If you ever go to the United States from Istanbul, go to Pittsburgh. Skip all the other cities, just go straight to Pittsburgh. They have stairs, you walk up and down. It's cute, it's got a lot of water, they have ferries. You're gonna say, wait, this is just like home. The people are very friendly, they will help you. It's very complicated to figure out, it has its own culture. Go to Pittsburgh. So, and also the streets were very tight. Now some of this has been destroyed, but some of it still exists. So you would still like Pittsburgh. And that's what the houses, the buildings look like up close. It looks familiar, right? Like, yeah, I've seen that before. Right outside. And that's, I think I had an automatic thing in here, which I don't know how to get rid of in some of these photos. Anyway, this is one of the major avenues and what it looks like. There happen to be exceptional photographers who in the 1940s and 50s went in to take pictures of the Hill. One of whom was Charles Teeny Harris, who took 80,000 photographs of the Hill District. So you can see, and these are now on the internet, you can see what life was like in a poor black community that was called a slum, but which in fact had thousands of organizations solving all kinds of problems. They had an organization of deer hunters, they had an organization of for boxing, there was an organization of transsexuals, anything you can imagine. And just lots of calm and lots of good times, right? A girl waiting for a bus. This is such a common photograph. This photograph of men playing checkers is profoundly important because it says I think this one photo, if you had to pick one photograph to tell you everything about the social process in the neighborhood, it would be this photograph. Why? because they're playing checkers outside, and there's organization, right? It's obvious that the men are organized. They are related to each other, not necessarily as bonds of family, but they understand how they want this. They're in control of the street as a collective. And I have seen many versions of this on the very small number of streets I've had the honor to walk in Istanbul. People are very aware of the street and have a lot of control. Even on the tram yesterday, we heard an argument between two men, and 5 guys moved into position to help calm the argument in case they should start fighting. So people have a plan, and this checkers is part of the culture. Checkers is from a game people played in the South. This black community had migrated from the South to the North to work in steel mills, and so they brought that with them. Notice how most of the men are wearing a hat, and they have on a shirt and suit pants. So they're very properly attired. So there's a lot of dignity to this, a lot of purpose, and a lot of connectedness. Now, this is civilization. And anywhere you go, you want to say, what is civilization? This is civilization. This is not about being rich or poor. It's about the social relatedness. Have you got a way to live together? And if something happened, if suddenly something started to go wrong, could those guys, would they get up and move to solve the problem? They would. And you know that from that photograph. Stanley Crouch, who's an important cultural critic in the United States, says that of the photographs by Charles Tini Harris, this collection provides us with an epic sense of life, which is to say that a civilization and how it worked is laid out before us. That's what's key, right? How does it work? If you want to understand what urban renewal will do, what is the harm, you have to understand what's working, which is quite invisible, right? It's hidden behind all the signifiers of poverty and distress and all the negative words in the United States that we apply to poor communities. So we have to get past that. The federal government, our national government, passed the Urban Renewal Act in 1949. It was implemented between that year and 1973. There were 2,500 projects in 1,000 American cities. 63% of the people relocated were African American. African Americans referred to urban renewal with the phrase, urban renewal is Negro removal, which was coined by James Baldwin, the great African American author. So of the 2,500 projects, we can estimate that 1,600 were directed at black ghetto communities. Now, in addition to thought a little bit about the individual level, a little bit about the collective, just want to say a little bit about the fact that in the African American system of segregation, there are very strong ties among African Americans across the nation. So taking out black ghetto communities in, let's say, 600 cities damages that national scale of the network. And if we think about who are the Chai guys at that level of scale, because there are Chai guys at every level of scale. And you may have a parallel here in Turkey called the railroad porters, who were mostly African American men, the Pullman porters. So porters on the trains would help people get their luggage on, the time when trains were very important for moving around the nation. They would help you get your luggage on. If you were traveling overnight, they would make your bed, they would bring you food, whatever help you needed on the train. Secretly, they would take the African American newspapers and spread them all across the nation. So in the Deep South, where the black community couldn't publish a newspaper, the porters, the Pullman porters, would bring the newspaper to the South so that people knew what was going on. So they were a network of information and connection, jobs, information, that went all around. It just seems that they were the Chai guys at that level of scale.
Sorry, what guys do you say?
Chai. You know the guys that bring the tea? My Turkish is not terribly good. That's actually the only Turkish word I know. So I showed you the people who, these are the people who lived in the neighborhood. And these are the people who made the decision to do urban renewal. And it's more bitter than that. One of the powerful capitalists in Pittsburgh was a man named Edgar Kaufman, who hired, he is the man who commissioned the famous house called Falling Water, which architects may have heard of Falling Water. Anyway, he wanted to have a place to listen to civic light opera out of doors. Now, this is the civic light opera crowd. And if you examine it carefully, there are about 5 people of color in this photograph. But the neighborhood, the African American neighborhood, was to be sacrificed for this, specifically to create a place for these people to be entertained. And this is the plan. The plan was to bulldoze all of that inside the boundaries, put in what they call the civic arena, which was going to have a roof that moved, so that Edgar Kaufman could hear civic light opera outside. They were going to put in highways between the black neighborhood and downtown and create parking lots. That's what it looked like. Now, this is American urban renewal. The scale is vast. It's taking a whole section, 8,000 families were displaced from this very dense neighborhood, important neighborhood. It was a downtown neighborhood. And that's that spaceship thing is the civic light opera. And then around it are parking lots, and you can also see the highways. So multiple barriers to movement are created so that the people who live here and in other parts of the Hill District are impeded from going downtown, and people from downtown can't get uptown. But to talk about root shock, this is a photograph of a woman who's being moved, and her face is this distress of, I don't want to move. This is a photograph of one of the buildings that was being demolished. This was being demolished to create public housing, which was one of the uses of land that was cleared by urban renewal. So I proposed the word root shock, the phrase root shock, because it seemed to me that as people were telling me their stories, David Jenkins and many other people, of being moved out of their neighborhoods, that they were trying to tell me about this, sort of like what happens to plants, that if you yank a plant out of the ground, it can go into shock and it can die. Because the system of roots that are in the ground are very complicated and delicate. And when you yank it out, you tear many parts of the roots. And the plant cannot survive being put someplace else. It is this shock to the system that people describe to me in great detail, and that we then defined as the traumatic stress reaction to the loss of all or part of one's emotional ecosystem. So this emotional ecosystem is your personal geography, the way you live in your world. And the argument that we would make is that this emotional ecosystem sustains you. It gives you a place in the world, gives you a pattern of life. It helps you to be part of civilization. The emotional ecosystem is the civilization, if it's strong. So losing part of it is devastating. In fact, I got an email today. I don't know if I can pull that up on my phone. But I got an email just today from a woman who was saying, I just found out about your work, and I lost my hometown, and this this is the first time. She said, "Dear Dr. Fullilove, first off, I want to say thank you for your work and the public information you've provided around gentrification, and in particular the phrase root shock. As someone who was personally displaced by gentrification, coming across this phrase on the Root Shock website was the first time I'd seen anything that named the disorientation I was feeling after losing my home. It was a relief. I'm a low-income artist and community college administration. My hometown, which I loved dearly, was gentrified and the community was shattered, with most of us scattered to different states and towns all over the place. The rent tripled in a 10-year period. None of us could keep up. People moved from houses and apartments to vans, just to try and maintain a sense of home and place, to be able to stay nothing of the effect on the elderly people. In summary, the experience was heartbreaking in a way I don't have words for. It was our whole lives and the fabric that made them. I don't even like going back because the faces and places are literally all gone. It's such a strange feeling." That's root shock. Now, if we were to, root shock is a deep personal hurt, but it's because of the tearing of the emotional ecosystem. And the losses to the person are not simply the personal psychological sequelae. They are also all the injuries to the emotional ecosystem. So we made this table of losses, and so people, when they're forced to sell their homes, don't get what the home is worth. It's higher cost to get a new home. There's the sentimental value of the home that's lost, etc. So there are many, many, many losses. And this is from a paper that's, I will have Sarah send you the link. It's on the internet. All of these losses lead to, are destabilizing for the whole, even the people who weren't moved are destabilized. So the lower part of the hill was cleared for urban renewal, but the other parts of the hill fell into disrepair. So the artist Carlos Peterson made this drawing, a whole series of drawings trying to show what disinvestment was like. And all of you walked up the stairs to get here, and this building is in the same state of disinvestment. This is disinvestment, is what it looks like, sagging. Now, people can solve the problem of disinvestment if they can put themselves back together. But in the United States, that has not been the case. So urban renewal has been followed by deindustrialization, so the loss of industry. Steel industry in Pittsburgh collapsed in 10 years. So right after urban renewal, which is 1950, 1960, in the 1970s, all the steel mills went away, which was where all those guys that I showed you, where they had worked. So there was no work all of a sudden. So this is the Middle Hill when I first started researching it. And you can see I showed you earlier the dense streets, but also the dense buildings. Now you have loss of buildings. And garbage has collected, and there are very few people on the streets. So it's a completely different environment. So this is what disintegration begins to look like. That there are few and weak leaders, small and fractured neighborhoods, and really importantly, people stop thinking that we are a group and we're supposed to take care of each other. And people start to think, I have to take care of me, and it doesn't matter what happens to you. And this justifies all kinds of violence. And the weak ties, the ones that go across groups, have disappeared. And the strong ties become more repulsive of each other. So that people retreat into their groups and they go to war with each other. So violence goes up. In the United States context, violence went up, drug addiction went up, infant mortality went up, maternal mortality went up. Now that doesn't mean that those will be the problems in any city. This is context dependent. So the diseases that follow in the wake of this kind of disturbance will be those that flow from the particular cultural setting. But those were the things that our cultural setting was primed to express when the civilization was disrupted. So just to say that the impact of urban renewal, what we learned in our study, was that it took communities from integration to disintegration. And that's a really huge transformation. Just to show it to you in another way, instead of the buildings doing work for the person, the buildings have been torn out and can't do the work anymore of holding society together. These are a few of the parts of the cartoon from the comic book, but I just wanted to put them in context of David's drawing, where he used to live, but there's a before and after. And David is quoted as saying, "They bulldozed it. I lost neighbors, church members, teachers, friends, and my home. To add to my problems, I have been HIV positive since 1981. When anyone is forced out of their home, people have to face the street." So this is we have talked about it in the American city, the need to destroy huge segments of the city in the way that I showed you. We have talked about as really a self-mutilation. And as in any city, visitors come to the downtown and it looks great, and they say, wow, you got a cool city, and they don't go to the neighborhoods that have suffered from these terrible series of displacements. So they don't know what we're really going through in the United States. But then you look at our elections and you wonder, how did we elect Donald Trump to be president? A man who lies all the time, who doesn't read the news, who doesn't know anything, and who's enacting a series of policies that are inane and insane. But this is the roots of it, that we have torn our civilization too much. And so in that context, fanaticism starts to make sense to people. It's very dangerous. So what can we do about it? So I just want to talk a little bit about Orange, New Jersey. That's obviously me, this little girl going to school. And I went to school at Oakwood Avenue School, which was a segregated school, officially segregated. Now, it was segregated by a gerrymander. A gerrymander is a line that it doesn't make logical sense, and it's done to group people. So the school line should have gone straight down Central Avenue, but instead it makes this turn because all the people who live there are black. Now, if you see that where it says Haywood District at the bottom, white people live there. Now, they live very close to Oakwood Avenue School, much closer than I did, but they were bused to Haywood Avenue School because they were white. So that was the point of the gerrymander, so that my little neighborhood was black, so we were grouped with Oakwood Avenue School, which was the all-black school, and then all the white people went to Haywood Avenue School. My father, who was a union and community organizer, started to organize to change this and was able to defeat the gerrymander. And then he put forward a platform for developing not only black political power, but black political power in coalition with other concerned citizens in the city to make improvements in the city. And these are all the things that they identified at the time as being the problems of the city. It's very much a platform that pretty much any American city could enact today and work on without any problems. This work in the 1960s was very important for the city. Among other things, the black community in Orange had no political representation at all, had no political engagement. They were just used by white politicians who would buy their votes. So they had no voice in local city government. So they not only came to have a voice, but they had a progressive voice, so that they were able to say policies that would really benefit the whole city. And this meant that when other American cities were having riots and rebellions, Orange didn't, because people were able to get together and actually solve their pressing problems. So we had a party for the 50th anniversary of the start of the school desegregation campaign. And we had such a good time at the party that we thought we should keep going. And so that's when we founded the University of Orange as a free people school, meaning we offer courses and on anything people want to teach, and anybody who wants to come can learn. Our longest running course is a course in music theory, taught by a actually internationally renowned musician and musicologist. So, but like MAD, we try to understand the ways in which these urban processes are tearing at Orange, and the ways in which we might come together and take the wisdom of the past of the city's story of building coalition, and use it in the future. I forgot to say that I could show this movie if I could go on the internet, but maybe this is a good time to stop because I've been talking for a long time. This thing has a timer. So I think I should stop. And I'm going to stop, you stop. And we should talk. And then if you want to see the movie, I'm sure you guys have great internet.
How long is this movie?
2 minutes.
Why don't we watch?
Yeah,
let's
watch it before.
Okay.
Speakers?
We'll bring the speakers.
All modern conveniences.
Cover a speech about, social capital in the very substantiated talk that, substantiates social capital into neighborhood context. I read neighborhood studies, so many neighborhood studies, but this was the best I've heard among all to, relate it with stories, and thank you for that.
Students took walking tours, interviewed residents, and researched the history of Orange. The result is a textbook for 3rd graders.
After writing the book, we kind of had a different perspective of what place called Orange. I had lived in Orange all my life before coming to Scholars and actually realizing how beautiful Orange really is to me. It was the worst thing.
When we started the tour, I never thought that Orange had this much history.
The effect was more than we could have imagined. So now we want to share the stories with the city of Orange and beyond. We're recording stories, building an interactive walking tour website, and continuing our work to discover and share our Orange. Communities are built on memory. It becomes the foundation for the future.
Would you like to take your own question by yourself, or would you like me to read?
I would love it. Molly said she would join me for questions.
Mindy, have you heard something about displacement of Roma community in Istanbul?
No, but I have heard a lot about Roma because I had opportunity to be with some Roma leaders in the media.
That neighborhood in which I spent all my childhood in just historical center of Istanbul. That community is called the oldest one, oldest settlement all around the world. Because you know the Roma people are moving always, but that community is placed since I think 1,000 years old anyway, and they are so integrated, as you called, a civilized community, because I know their lives very well. They are poor. They are really poor community, but with a great solidarity, they can overcome the difficulties anyway. And they are so good, you know, in music, in dancing. They play some instruments very well. Because although they are poor, but they were so happy people actually. About 10 years ago, the renewal work has started, because the area was so valuable, because just center of the old city, the old city walls, just near the old city walls, and the argument of the government was that they are living in very bad conditions. We will make some healthy buildings and we move them to this area, and so life conditions will be better. That's why we are planning to renew. But of course we know that this is not the real reason. Anyway, now they built completely a new area, very luxury buildings, and all those peoples now were spread it in different places in Islam. Culture with 1,000 years old now disappeared. This is very sad story actually. This is an example from Istanbul.
I think it was a great argument that big ties are actually what hold the cities and communities together. But I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about how theoretically those big ties function and making us civilizations or communities.
Well, of course, there's a lot to say on that topic, but the crucial thing is that weak ties are bridging ties. So strong ties partition, they separate, but so a family has its boundaries, religion has boundaries. So if you have more than one family and more than one religion, you need to have a way to bridge. So who is it that connects, that goes across? So it's not the people within, it's not from their role within the community, within the family, within the partitioning group that people can do that. It's their role in the society. So the people who can move around or who get to meet everybody, those are the people who have the weak ties, who are just so important. So in New York City, we have coffee carts. And so the people who have the coffee carts have a particular corner that they're on. And the corner where our office was in the middle of a neighborhood that had been badly damaged and was in the middle of a violence epidemic. When Martin came in and established his coffee cart, he could police the area. And he knew it was a Dominican neighborhood, he knew all the Dominican taxi cab drivers. So all of a sudden there were a constant stream of powerful men who were coming to our corner, and it calmed the violence down. So it works in that manner. People say if you need a job, you have to, it's not your strong ties. Don't ask your family. Go to the guy on the corner who runs the candy store. Tell that guy.
So are people who are displaced, do they go back to the same types of communities, or are they put, or do they go to different communities, or what's like the after effect, and like physically in terms of finding a home?
Well, very few studies have been done of where do people go.
Yeah.
So it's one of the great unanswered questions, where do people go? For African Americans, they can't go wherever they want because there's segregation. So they have to go to other segregated communities. But then you have the problem of affordability in this present day. So in the United States at the present moment, we're in a housing crisis. All of these programs of forced displacement destroyed low-income housing without replacement. So now we're in literally a housing famine. We don't have enough low-income housing. So this means that if you're displaced from one poor community, you can't go to the next over poor community, which is what people used to do, because it's priced out of your range. So you may have to go quite far. But white people, if they're displaced, will spread out more freely because they can live pretty much where they want. But in the United States at this point, there's no county where somebody making the minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment at the market rate. So the housing crisis is nationwide with just so terrible consequences.
You talk about rights, so I want to ask something because your perspective is kind of you talk on ethnical perspective, and I also can say that urban renewal projects mostly racist projects because they are always targeted. As in United States, black people in here, Alevi, Kurdish, Roma people or LGBT people they targeted. So you said that this community in this neighborhood there is no riot, but the others, as I didn't misunderstood. But I think the urban renewal projects try to prevent the riots itself because they wanna assimilate us, the others. So they want to spread us all around the city and also around the country actually in bigger scale. So if there is a strong boundaries in the community, the others community, they probably will riots. Isn't it? I don't know.
You know, you have to look at who's doing what where. So I am. I think that sort of what are the negative things that are possible after urban renewal? Do you remember I said you always have to think about your local context, and you have to think about local history, and you have to think about what's present in the local scene. And then you have to watch and see what happens. So, for example, the displacement program in New York City called planned shrinkage occurred in the middle of the 1970s. when the HIV virus, human immunodeficiency virus, the AIDS virus, had just gotten to New York. So, and it was in the neighborhoods that were burned down, that were demolished. So it contributed to spreading the AIDS epidemic. It also spread violence and other problems. But if urban renewal did not spread AIDS, right? Urban renewal is in the 50s and 60s. There's no HIV in the United States at that point. So urban renewal displaces people, but it doesn't accelerate the AIDS epidemic. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you have to know what's happening in your local context in order to follow. So if there are a whole segment of a city that's African American and they bulldoze a substantial portion, there's still a lot of black people there. And the people move into the next over neighborhood, making overcrowding, which leads to the riots. So in that situation in the United States, we did get riots after urban renewal. If there's a little tiny Roma community and they can demolish the whole thing, what's going to happen next is going to be very different. So you have to follow, these stories are very exact, and you have to follow the very exact story. But one of the things that happens, should we just cover that projector?
Sure.
One of the things that happens after urban renewal, or any kind of displacement, is that people feel alienated. And alienated people do violence of one kind or another. So the likelihood, if you displace a whole lot of people, that there'll be some kind of violence goes up. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be a riot. They may not be able to organize people, but there may be domestic violence, there may be suicide. So there are many kinds of violence that can go up in the aftermath of urban renewal. And so you have to watch carefully. This is not, I'm not trying to give you a formula. I'm trying to say what I think are the elements of the process that you have to attend to. And the key thing about this, as we say in the United States, we don't use the metric system. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. They don't do urban renewal.
Thank you very much for your speech, because it was very illuminating, and I learned a lot, because we don't, I personally, I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm not working on these issues, but I'm aware of what's happening, especially in Istanbul. And also, for example, there's a district in the Asian side of Istanbul, which is called twentieth. The direct translation is hill of ideas, do we say? I mean, the name of the district is interesting. And now I think a very similar thing is happening there, because it was a district where people from other cities of Turkey migrated during the 1960s to Istanbul and settled there, many of them without a proper certification of the land, which is called gecekondu in Turkish, and it means made in one night houses. And now there are huge buildings instead of these houses, and there were a lot of problems during the takeover. I think there will be, maybe there are already some sociologists have been working on these issues. And what struck me is what happens in the aftermath of renewal very much resembles the aftermath of disasters, you know, like earthquakes or other types of disasters. The same parameters happen in mental health and health area, happen right after the disaster period. It was also interesting for me. Thank you.
The only thing I would say about that, because it's a very good connection between, because displacement is displacement, it doesn't matter the cause. In the US context, after a disaster, there's some hope that people will say, oh, it was a disaster, we should fix it. We don't do a very good job of fixing it, but there's some hope that we would say that. Whereas after urban renewal, we say, no, it's progress. Why would we fix it? We fixed the problem. So that people are left to deal with whatever the problems are that they find themselves in. So that's just the one thing that I've noticed about disasters is there's an impulse, they're seen as bad, whereas urban renewal is seen as good.
Thanks for your speech. I work a position at not similar, the same area like your project, and 60s, 80s, and 23 generations built homes in Istanbul, and like a hill and near the road is named Yusu in Turkey, and urban renewal is this year. All the buildings changed maybe 5 or 10 years later. But you have an organization, but we have an organization, for example, this urban renewal hasn't 1 meter square house area, the new urban renewal. So I want to ask you, your project career profile, for example, PGS, physicians, and another persons. The video is you attending this project, and another persons how attending this project, or you have books or other materials about this project to change the history. Which persons attending this project? I want to learn it.
I'm going to let Molly answer that question. Sorry. Well, in terms of books, though, there's 2 really interesting books that Mindy has written. One which is called Root Shock, and I think that's really useful in terms of thinking about how you educate people around the threat of renewal and the reality of what can happen and what it means, because I think I imagine that part of the struggle is this idea that people will still think it's progress, maybe even just your friends from another neighborhood or your uncle, and you try to explain like, no, we can't, we have to say no to this, right? So you have to think about how you're having these people have solidarity with your struggles, right? So Root Shock is a really useful book about that. I think the other book and base of research that we use to inform our work in Orange is Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy to America's Sorted Out City. But a lot of the work that we're doing in Orange is thinking about how we restore connection and create places where people can stay, but really in a post-urban renewal context. And some of the work, we're very happy to be here at the Center for Spatial Justice because some of our work is very similar and aligned with the work that you all are doing here in making sure that you're collecting and sharing and honoring people's stories and their connections to place, so that you're really thinking about what makes the city for everyone. So and we can, I can give you our information because we have the website and everything, and things you can download and all of this kind of stuff. But it seems to me that some of our work is really thinking about what's happened since urban renewal and these series of policies that have really undermined what's the health of our cities and the connection, but a lot of, and because of that, we're in the midst of a huge gentrification crisis, so we have a lot of organizing we have to do, and you also have to really think about your organizing and how you're organizing to protect and fight for your neighborhood. So we're very interested always to be exchanging resources about that, especially because right now in the United States,
like we said, we have a huge affordability crisis, and so everyone's under the threat of displacement. So
I just want to add that I was so interested that you have a course, that MAD has a course here on urban political ecology, which I think is a fundamentally important concept. We talk about political economy and we talk about urban ecology, but urban political ecology is actually really great. I'm going to take that home and tell everybody. Because it's very important that, for example, you understand the story of the Roma being displaced, not as a problem for the Roma. It is a problem for the Roma, but as a catastrophe for Istanbul. Because if they do it to enough people, the delicate thing that's going on here, the delicate rhythms of this city will fall apart. And that, you know how things are centripetal or they are centrifugal. So if you destroy these little delicate things that have existed for 1,000 years, you just need to put one grain of sand in a clock and it ruins the whole clock. I don't know how many neighborhoods you can do this to without creating chaos in Istanbul. This is a delicate thing you've got going on here, is my reading of it. Think about my watch, right? If I break the stem, I've broken the whole watch. It's not like the rest of it continues to work if I don't have the stem. It's one watch, right? This is one city. I want to just comment for a minute on the delicacy of Istanbul. And I've been here for 7 days. What do I know? I know nothing. But my father, African-American union organizer, went to a city, a strange city, and he was saying something about racism in the city to somebody white. And that man said, "How do you know there's racism here? You just got here." He said, "I know racism and I see it." So I just want to say I've been to a lot of cities. I've only been in your city for a few days, but I've been to a lot of cities and I've thought a lot about what makes cities work. And your city has a mechanism like a clock. Everywhere I go, I keep feeling like this is like a clock. People are moving in this extremely complicated ballet. And they're moving all over, and everybody's moving really fast and working really hard. And I was thinking about the mosques on the top of the hill, and I was like, there must really be an id in this city that the mosques are trying to keep down, right? Like, what's the id of Istanbul? Because that's the kind of question psychiatrists like to ask. What's the id of Istanbul? So I was just, over lunch thinking about the id of Istanbul, that the mosques are trying to be on the top of the hill to say.
Karaköy, you mean?
Yeah. Like the mosques on the top of the hill are like the superhero trying to keep the id from bursting out. I don't know the answer to what is the id of Istanbul. Except I was thinking that there's a lot of books with a picture of a woman lounging on a sofa in a harem. So there's a lot of id here in Istanbul. But the thing about that is that it's a lie, because what I learned at the Topkapi Palace was that all the women in the harem had to learn trades. So they were working all day long just like everybody else. They had to learn to be a belly dancer or a seamstress, or they had to learn something, and they were all working. So they weren't just sitting around on a sofa being id. Now, what is the point of all this? What am I trying to say here? That there's some enormous million number of people in Istanbul, 17 million, 20 million. There's a lot of people. And they're moving around and making the city. But I'm telling you, if you take a whole bunch of sand and throw it into this clockwork, it's going to do scary, terrifying things. This is not a city. This city is too delicate. It's too delicate to mess with. Now, I don't know how you do enough urban political ecology education to teach people that they cannot mess with this city. It's too, they can't, you just can't. You have to stop them. Now they look at the city, the powers that be, the forces of capitalism, global capitalism, and moving money through the second circuit of real estate. They see dollar signs, or what do you call them, lira signs.
Lira is not that violent.
Do they see dollar signs? They see gold. Gold. There's in the American gold rush in the 1848, they used to say there's gold in them thar hills, right? There's gold in them thar hills. They want the gold, and they don't care about the chaos. But Istanbul is a world city. It's connected to the whole world. So if you cause chaos in Istanbul, you cause chaos in the whole world. So I don't want to make you too nervous about how much responsibility is on your shoulders. But I think a lot of responsibility is on your shoulders. And we'll help. We'll be your allies. But there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders to smack them and make them respect this incredibly delicate ecology of Istanbul that is one of the pivot points of the world. They should not mess with this city. So, did I make you sad? And you knew it already.
We are aware.
Alert.
But
So I would like to comment on that. So your root chart, this traumatic, how do you call that?
Stress reactions.
Stress reactions, and we mainly talk on personal level, right, the individual, and then we multiply that because in the community, that traumatic stress reaction is not only one individual's reaction, but is the community's reaction, because more than one person is going through this stress, going through this process. Urban renewal is targeting an area that is in shock. It's very similar in Istanbul as well. It comes with the legal tools, it comes with this kind of large actors like all these men in suits, very similar patterns. So can you comment a bit on this kind of more cumulative effect of this root shock, like when it's not only the individual but the whole communities? I guess that is how you refer when you say messing up with the clock, right? Like it's, that increases the risk, that increases the danger, that can mess up the whole city.
Yeah, the whole world. Yeah. Why do I say the whole world? First of all, the whole city, but also the whole world. Because Istanbul is at a crossroads. Mm-hmm. I was saying to Molly that there's, I was thinking like, what does a Turkish man look like? Like, is there a classic Turkish man? So I've been studying Turkish men, and I was, no, because it's really a crossroads, right? There were four guys having raka at the table next to us in the restaurant last night, and one looked like he was from Scotland, and one looked like he was the son of Genghis Khan, and one could have been Hispanic from my neighborhood, and then the other guy looked like the classic Turkish guy. I just made up that he was. But, and I said to Molly, these people don't look alike. And she's like, yeah, it's a crossroads. It's a crossroads. People are coming from Asia, people are coming from Europe. And so this is the deep history of this place, right? You're a city on two continents. You know this better than I do. But that means that it ripples all across the world. There's something about the id and the ego and the superego here that's holding a lot of stuff in check on both sides. And so, but to get to your question, does any of that make any sense? My ramblings.
Well, in terms of, I don't know how we can mess up the whole world because we are, but it's good enough just to mess up our mega city.
But you should think about it, because I know that I'm right about that. No, I'm staying in Sultanahmet, and you know, you got Hagia Sophia and you got the Blue Mosque. You know what I mean? It's like these like religious tensions, among others, that meet at this point. It's a meeting point of tensions that have threads throughout the whole globe. So if you swing one way or the other, you pull all the threads with you. Does that make any sense?
I think we should think about that a lot. I mean, maybe now it's not very easy to settle all these ideas, but for example, what came to my mind, I thought that, for example, the new government and president built another very big mosque in one of the hills of Istanbul on the Asian side, and this made a lot of sense for me because, to press or oppress certain things, maybe the symbol of mosque and religion is being used now because it's a very important symbol in the Turkish community, the mosque and religion, etc. So I think it's a very interesting point, and now I'm not able to really put things in the right place about this idea, but we should think about it.
But the flip side of this, in Freudian psychology, of the superego is that there's the longings, the desires, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is walking around, not even walking, moving so fast, working so hard. People are working very hard in this city. And they're basically very preoccupied with working hard. But what are they longing for? So when we were having lunch, there were some seagulls on the roof. And the waiter called us over to the window, and he said, watch, in Turkish. I don't know what he said. I already said watch. Anyway, he opened the window, and he had a little piece of bread, and he threw it outside to the seagulls, and the seagulls were eating it, and he beamed with joy watching the seagulls eat. And it was such a lovely moment of this guy enjoying this, right? Enjoying the seagulls. He had such a relationship with them, like they were waiting. It was like, our guy will come, he's got some bread. We're good. It's sort of like, what are the deep longings, right? And global capital doesn't care about the deep longings, and that's the clash, right? But when it clashes and people get thrown off course and they can't get to their deep longings and they're in such pain, it tilts the whole thing, the whole globe. So it's that, right? Does the guy have enough bread to throw some to the seagulls? That's the whole point of it. The guy's got to have enough bread. That makes joy. Spreads joy.
In fact, I want to reflect back on Yashar's question and give an example of it. And
yes.
Your talk reminded me a lot of things about social capital, and I was doing my research in a small neighborhood that was thought to be going into an urban renewal project. It was a very old neighborhood, and when I was doing my research and I'm knocking on the door and asking people to participate in my research, and some of them were, I know them, they're inside, but they're not answering, and sometimes they refuse to, participate. And I heard that there was a rumor about me in the neighborhood that I was from the municipality and collecting information about the people, if they have kind of solidarity among them, if they're going to, resist, because I had questions like, participation, going into a, demonstration, that kind of stuff, and they were fearing, they had the fear that, the government or the municipality was collecting information before the urban renewal. And maybe to add that, root shock, individually, creates some kind of mental health problems with people, but also creates a kind of a fear among the others that they were going to suffer the same consequences like the people that we are talking about. Like I faced it, and they were in fear that they were going to be ripped out from their neighborhoods and houses and sent to some places. And also, secondly, in your slides, I saw that there was this I. I mean, instead of we, it becomes I. And I think in urban renewal projects, it might start even earlier. If there's no urban renewal project, there might be some kind of I of thinking, thinking of the self or the group, to find new ways or opportunities for creating some kind of wealth or money by being an ally with these people or with capitalism and that stuff. So that's another thing. It might begin earlier. And my question would be, I mean, in terms of research, I mean, your study, based on stories, you collected them with people, but what kind of other research that you are doing, for example, now on the ground, or what kind of other studies are you doing with your team, and what kind of methodologies you use to collect more information about this? I wonder that.
Me too. I wonder that all the time. We've just we're just finishing up a story on a research on gentrification, looking at Orange, New Jersey, and a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. The neighborhood in Washington, D.C. has been almost completely gentrified, and Orange, New Jersey is under threat of gentrification, but hasn't been completely gentrified. So we're looking at it as early stage and late stage gentrification. So we're just finishing that study. You want to say anything about that study? About what we're doing?
Well, we're working collaboratively with organizers in both places, so that it's, while we're studying what's happening to the neighborhoods, we're also unearthing strategies for organizing, because that's what's really important to us, is kind of this idea of action research and also participatory research, but also research for the people, so that as we're learning, we're thinking about how we're sharing and putting it into practice. The methodology we've been using is called situation analysis. So rather than interviewing an exhaustive list of people, it's interviewing a selection of people that fit kind of what are the different categories of people we want to look at. And so it's really about creating this snapshot in time to have like a whole view of what's happening in each neighborhood, and then working collaboratively with really like local based neighborhood community grassroots organizations. And really the next phase is thinking about how we use popular education methodologies to share the lessons, so that we're creating as much of a broader conversation as possible about what's happening and what we do. It's our belief at the University of Orange that the forces that are influencing cities all over the world, these forces of the way global capital is moving in place, are the same, but that the way the way they hit the ground is about how we live together locally. And so the way that we preserve and fight for and organize to protect our places, our strategies can't be the same. It has to be from our specific place and our own connections and the local, but it's so important that we're all engaged in conversation across neighborhoods and cities and communities, so that we're understanding the nature of these forces and the scale of them.
Our research group, we've done many kinds of studies over the decades of work. So, but really we found that situation analysis was particularly useful for our purposes. And we have a chapter on how we do it that's on our Rhodes website. So if that's interesting to you. We use situation analysis. The first actually major time we used it was to do the Rhodes study, but we have continued since then.
There's no question left. Maybe I can ask one final question or two.
I'm really interested in your dialogue between psychiatry and social science in general through your personal academic profession trajectory. I was wondering how, for example, difficult or easy has it been for you to cross these boundaries? I know you're teaching a political economy of the city class, coming from a psychiatry background, publishing in different journals, for example. Is how welcoming academia is to, for crossing the boundary at that level. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is maybe related to Yashar's question from a different angle. How meaningful, I know it is, but I would like to hear from your perspective, for a psychologist or a psychiatrist to care deeply about urban and social problems, because there might be a perceived mismatch between the different scales, right? This personal scale, and there are certain pressing questions there that psychologists or psychiatrists needs to address at that point. And there's the reality of the social world, the urban life, the city, social inequality, etc., etc. So the question is, how can the profession of psychiatry, psychology, can benefit from a critical social, or the perspective of social critique, for example, and how can they? I mean, I don't know much about the profession, by the way, and how to what extent they can, bring that kind of perspective into their profession.
Yeah, I would say that when I started looking at cities and publishing on the psychology of place, people in my department of psychiatry, also in public health, maybe even more in public health, thought I was crazy. They just thought it was, in a series of useless ideas, the most useless idea I'd come up with. And so nobody paid too much attention to me. So much to my surprise, now everybody is doing place-based work. And when did we start? 1996. 1996 is when I published my paper on psychiatric implications of displacement, contributions from the psychology of place. So between 1996 and now, everybody is doing it. So there is an expression you may know, he laughs best who laughs last.
There's the same expression in Turkish.
But more interestingly, in that period, not when I was training in psychiatry, but afterwards, American psychiatry became entirely concerned with the biomedical model, totally preoccupied with prescribing drugs. So they weren't interested in my work at all. So I didn't pay much attention to what was going on in psychiatry. I really have worked in urbanism with urban planners and architects. I served on the board of the American Institute of Architects as a psychiatrist, and they made me an honorary member, so I hung out with those people. I didn't hang out with psychiatrists. But I recently was invited to speak at a conference at Yale University Department of Psychiatry called Rebel Psychiatry, which was all about how the social influences the individual. At Yale University, which is a very, very prominent institution, a very important department of psychiatry. And one of my mentees, Helena Hansen, has worked with others to create a whole thing in medicine they call structural competence, meaning that physicians should have competence in understanding how structures work. So I think much of that was influenced by Sir Michael Marmot in England, who started talking about the social determinants of health. So I think what was really a suppressed conversation had to come from England outside to become a vibrant conversation in the United States. So it's been a surprising journey.
I would think in terms of working in interdisciplinary groups and teams and organizations, which you are, it's so useful to have people from a public health perspective, also in part because they're always reminding you of the urgency of this work to fight for equitable cities and preserve people in place, because they're consistently reminding you that it's actually about life and death, and that this is actually influencing, like when urban planners are making decisions about where resources are going to go and all these things, that they're actually making decisions that involve people's health outcomes and life expectancy. So having that level of reality as a consistent reminder as part of your work is really important.
Oh, public health people feel good.
There are some others.
So before we end here, let me thank you for being here, and let me remind you that copies of this comic book is just outside. You can grab one, and there is more information on the website, Rhodes Shock. Check it out. There are articles and other PDFs like these.
And after you go to Pittsburgh, you can come to New Jersey.
The second most important city to visit in the United States. Forget New York, forget LA. Pittsburgh and Orange. People say, why are you going to Pittsburgh and Orange? Just say, because they're the most important. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.